Hi guys, Miss Lacasse here. I'm going to go over our lesson for the day with line plot graphs and interpreting and reading those. Before we jump into our line plots, we're going to do a little bit of a review for vocabulary from Monday. So these are some vocab words on the left that are important when you're reading line plot graphs. You have average, or sometimes called the mean, mode, median, and range. On this side, you have definitions of what those can mean. It could be the number in the middle, the difference between the highest and lowest term, the number that occurs the most often, or a typical amount for that group of data. So what I'd like you to think about is which vocab word on the left matches which definition on the right. I'm going to give you a few seconds, so if you hear silence, give you some thinking time. All right, here we go. First one, average. Which definition on the right matches the word of average or mean? That one is going to be the typical amount for that group of data. All right, next word is mode. The way I like to think about this one is MO, most often. So that's the number that occurs the most often in whatever set of data I am looking at. Next one is median. Median, like in the middle of a road, runs down the middle, so I know that's going to be my middle number. And last we have range, so let's check that one. We have the difference between the highest and lowest term, which is correct. Great job. Okay, moving on to our actual line plot that we're going to look at today. And this one is going to be how much time is spent watching TV during the weekend. What I'd like to do first is just look at the graph and think about what the graph is showing me before I jump into answering any of those questions. So I'm going to give you some time and think about what this graph is showing you. All right, so some things that I notice about this graph is that it has some different labels and titles. Up here is the title of the graph, time spent watching TV during the weekend. Tells me what the graph is about. I also notice that the X down here represents one person, so every X is one person. I notice that the data is showing me hours of time spent watching TV and not minutes. I noticed that some people in this data have watched 0 hours of TV on the weekend, and we also have people who have watched up to 2.5 hours of TV on the weekend. And I'm guessing during this point when we're all stuck at home, some of us are watching more than 2.5 hours. I also noticed that the numbers are going up, it looks like by 0, half, 1, by a half, and that they're in fractional units along the way. So with that, we're going to now, after we spent some time just looking at the data, go into answering the questions. Question 1, how many students were surveyed in all? So all I need to do for this part of my graph is to look above and count the X's because I know each X back to this was one person. So for the first data, I have 2 people above the 0. 1, 2, 3, 4 people watched 1.5 hour. Then I go on 3 for 1 hour, 1 for 1.5, 3 people for 2 hours, and 1 for 2.5. And then I'm going to simplify. 2 plus 4 is 6. 3 plus 1 over here is 4, plus another 4. And again, simplify. 6 plus 4 is 10, plus another 4 would be 14. So 14 students or 14 people were surveyed during this graph. Number 2, how many students watched TV during the week? That seems like it would be 14 because that's how many people were surveyed. Maybe I would have to take the zeros off. Oh, I see a word. I remember when I was looking at the title of this graph, it said how much time spent watching during the weekend, and this question is asking about the week, but this graph won't let me answer that question. So for this one, I'm going to say unable to answer. The graph shows data about TV watched during the weekend. Not the week. Interesting. All right, number 3, what is the range of the data? So I go back to range would be the difference between the highest and lowest terms. So again, I noticed that the highest they had was 2.5 hours, even though we have maybe watched more. So I'm going to start with the 2.5. And you might think that, it's fractions, but let's continue and see how it is. The lowest amount of TV would be 0 hours. And if I took the difference, which would be subtracting, that would leave me with simply 2.5 hours for my range. Number 4, determine the mode. Mode is the one that is occurring most often. And again, this one I'm just going to look at my data up here on my line plot graph. And to me, it looks like there are the most x's above 1/2. So the mode would be 1/2 hour. All right, moving on. Number 5, how many students spent 1 or more hours watching TV? So again, it's the tricky part of that one is not just 1, which would be 3 people, it's 1 or more. So I have to look at 1 all the way to the end of the graph. So I actually would have 3 people on 1 hour, 1 on 1.5, 3 on 2 hours, and another 1 on 1.5. So that would make 4 plus 4. So in total, 8 students out of the 14 spent more than 1 hour watching TV. Number 6, what is the median number of hours spent watching TV during the weekend? So median seems to be the key word that I need to know for this question in order to answer it. And this is the one where you're going to find the number in the middle. So I have to list, first of all my data points in order from least to greatest. So I'm going to start with 0. And because there are 2 x's above the 0, I have to list 2 zeros in my list. Then I go to 1/2. How many x's are above 1/2? Correct, 4. So I have to do 1/2 4 times. 3 1s. 1 1.5. 3 2s. And 1 2.5 up there. And this is the one where you're going to start Xing them out from each side until you get to the number that's actually in the middle. So 1 on this side, 1 on that side. And it looks like my number in the middle is, or my median, is actually going to be 1 hour. All right, number 7, determine the total number of hours spent watching TV. Now, I could simply add up all my data on my line plot graph, but I'm going to use my smart 5th grade brain, and instead I'm going to multiply those numbers because I think it will be easier for me in the long run. So I'm going to take each data set, so this one would be 0 times 2. And I'm going to add that to the next one, which would be 1/2. And there are 4 of those, so I would multiply it by 4. Added to the next category of 1, 3 of those, plus the next category, 1.5 times 1, plus 2 times 3, plus 2.5 times 1. Wow, now that looks like a very long, complicated math problem with a lot of fractions and numbers. And I might think, wow, I do not know how to solve this. But in fact, if I start to break it down into smaller parts, it should be fairly simple for me. So 0 groups of 2, I know is going to be 0. 1/2 times 4, so 4 1/2, 4 over 2 is going to be equivalent to the number 2. 1 times 3, well, that's easy, 3, plus, fraction, but just multiplied by 1. So I know anything multiplied by 1, doesn't matter what the number is going to remain that number of 1/2. 2 times 3, 6. Oh, another fraction, but again, multiplied by 1, so that makes it easy, 2.5. So now this makes it a lot easier to look at and to add up all my answers. I now see that there are 2 mixed numbers with halves. I'm going to use the commutative property to move them together so I can add those first, and the associative because I'm going to group those two together, and then I'm going to group all the whole numbers that I have left, which is 0, 2, 3, and 6. Then I'm going to come add this first. 1.5 plus 2.5 is 3. 1/2 plus 1/2 is 1, so 3 plus 1 would be 4. And my whole number, 0 plus 2, 2, 2 plus 3, 5, 5 plus 6 is going to be 11. So I am at 15 hours. Total time spent watching TV, 15 hours between the 14 people. Number 8, what is the average or mean number of hours that people watch TV? Round your answer to the nearest whole number. So for this one, I know for the average or the mean, I need to find the total amount spent watching TV. Oh, that's already done in number 7. So I know it's going to be 15 hours. And I know that the second step is I have to divide it by the numbers that I added up together. And I know from counting my X's before all together is that I added up 14 numbers. Now you might be confused because technically we multiplied up here, but I still am adding up 14 numbers. And that was 14 people. So I really essentially have 14 divided by 15. Okay, 14 can go into 15 only one time. I used 14 and I have 1 left. So my remainder is 1/14 of an hour. But I have to round that to the nearest whole. So 1 hour and 1/14. 1/14 is very close to 0, so this is simply going to round to 1 hour. So the average amount of time that these 14 people spent watching TV equals 1 hour. So your job today when you get to your line plot graphs is to think about mean, median, mode, range, and answer those questions based on the line plots with fractions today. Good luck!